do that.
Okay, let's go ahead and get started, and we'll wait for the others to arrive as they, hopefully. Welcome, everyone. Happy New Year. We are going to start, I guess you want to start here with James before we move into this first item. Do you have anything you want to talk about, James?
Let me just say that on page 2, we took the adopted budget that is controlled, most of it is controlled by central office, and we have done an accumulation. So this commission has seen approximately 70% of the budgets over the last 2 years.
Based on, is there any thought in terms of these other areas that we're going to be thought about whether or not any of these other areas are going to come up before?
We're trying to work our way through it so that you get all those
Of sizable ones at least? Okay. Right. Okay. I guess we'll go into custodial, outsourcing. Dino?
Okay. Good afternoon. We're going to start on, let's start on page 5 of your handout. See if I can get through this maintenance cost. Jim just let me know that our maintenance costs, so we're not talking apples to apples, these are maintenance costs which right now include all of Function 51, which would have maintenance and custodial. This data is from 2009-10, and what we're looking at here is how we rank against our peer groups. As you see across the bottom there, the asterisks, those are what you would call, what we call best in class. Those are what we call in that 1-1 category. Those are the best in class. So we're chasing, if you will, Carrollton Farmers Branch and Garland. That's where, if we were going to catch anybody, that's where we'd want to be. The blue line shows you where we are today in relationship to these, what we call these top 200, which is our peers here. But this is total cost per student and not just the custodial piece of that.
So $768 for us, and then roughly $620 to $628 for the others, for the best in class.
Correct.
Is there any sort of feedback, or do we have any sort of anecdotal feedback in terms of quality of service? I mean, do we have a sense for, is there a way to figure out from those districts how well they think?
How well they're doing?
And also, do you have a sense for whether or not these districts outsource or insource? Because you're talking about a 25% difference. That's a roughly $145 or $150 difference per foot, per student rather, against a base of $620. So that's 20 to 25% higher for DISD.
I know Carrollton Farmers Branch does not outsource any services except for transportation, and they have the same arrangement with Dallas County Schools that we do. But for maintenance, they have it all in-house.
Houston, if memory serves me correct, only does their food services piece.
Sorry, Houston only what?
Houston only does the food service.
Internalize. They only internalize. They outsource everything else.
I beg your pardon. Houston outsources to, I believe it's Aramark that's doing their food service.
They internalize everything else.
Yes.
Okay. And what about Garland? Do you have any sense for Garland? Since they're the other kind of low.
I'd have to check. I'm not sure about Garland. I'll follow up on that one.
So once you, if you don't mind, and for me, anybody else has any questions, if you could come back and help us understand what they outsource versus insource for these districts that we're trying to compete with.
Against? Okay.
And just what they're doing differently.
Yeah, what they're doing differently.
You know, how does it?
If you don't mind, help us understand, you know, if we were able to get to that level, times the number of students we have, what's the, you know, what, is that 10 million, 15 million, 20 million, 5 million, what's the overall?
Okay.
The other thing, how many campuses and facilities do they entail? How comparable, of course.
That's the question. Let's have a price per square foot instead of a cost per student. Does that work for you, Todd?
Say again?
A cost per square foot rather than a cost per student?
Well, and we're looking at the magnitude. Both of those are smaller districts than Dallas ISD, and Dallas ISD is spread out over the whole city as far as facilities and buildings and all of that as to what has to be done. So those aren't comparable to what Dallas has to even do.
Our schools are older than a lot of these benchmark cities.
Absolutely.
So what you want to see, the comparison on the maintenance cost per student as well as the cost per square foot comparisons? Is that what I'm hearing?
Then also a scale of
Yeah, the scale of what their magnitude is compared to what ours is.
But you should be able to level that out with the cost per student and the cost per square foot. You should be able to get a feel for it irrespective. Both of those districts are big enough to where it's not like they only have 3,000 or 4,000 kids.
Sure.
Harlan's got nearly 60,000 kids. I don't know what Farmers.
They're just over 26,000.
And they're big enough to be valid comparisons on a per student and per square foot basis.
Really, if anything, you would expect there to be, some economies.
The bigger you are.
Bigger.
Oh,
More
So-
purchasing power for supplies,
Exactly.
all that stuff.
Exactly, it would go the other way.
The problem with comparing maintenance per anything per school district is determining what they're deferring and what they're not deferring. And so that's a difficult comparison to make, but we have been looking at cost per square foot specifically for custodial services and comparing that to the Council of Great City Schools benchmark, and in that area we don't fare well either.
I mean, I'm sort of receptive to your saying, suggesting to us this is the way you ought to be looking at it, or this is how you break it down to understand,
Okay.
the numbers.
We're kind of working through all of that right now, so we're just kind of giving you a preview of what to look for. And right now, all we've really done is we've opened the bids, and Jay, why don't you talk about what we've done and what we can and cannot discuss at this point in time?
Okay, we opened the bids just before the holiday, and we were able to distribute the proposals to the members of the evaluation committee to look at throughout the holidays. We had our first meeting last Wednesday, and there were a number of items that needed to be clarified from each vendor in order to understand what they were proposing, just so we would have a good idea of comparing each proposal one to another. That list, probably about individual bidders had their specific questions that we addressed just to them, and then we had about a dozen or so general questions. So it's probably in the area of 25 to 30 additional follow-up questions that we submitted to the vendors today. And so it's going to take a little time to get that back and then get the information to the committee members and then incorporate that in the
Was
process.
each bid for the entire district?
Sorry?
Was each bid for the entire district, or were there quadrants?
It's for the entire district, yeah.
For whatever it's worth, and I'm curious as to what my colleagues say, if I do this math, this is $150 a square foot times 157,000 kids is $24 million. If you have an average teacher salary of $50,000 to $55,000 per teacher, and I may be wrong, I may be off, that's, over 400 teachers that could be. But I think the biggest challenge, and I think it came from the budget, when we did this budget memo last time around, we talked about trying to bid it in quadrants or some sort of, so that no vendor thought that they had monopoly power and that you'd never replace them because it would be too difficult to replace them, so that we could get into some sort of a bite-sized chunk so that any one of them thought, if I don't do my job and I don't satisfy the principals, there's somebody else already in the district that can take my job the next day. So I think that improves the quality of perception to the principal. So for what it's worth, I would recommend, curious what other people think about, when you guys go back for your additional questions, I would encourage you to try and figure out a way to get them to come back with bids for what they would do, a subset of this, so we can get a sense for how much. They're probably going to price it not as aggressively because they're only going to take part of it, not all of it. But I think that quality control factor and letting them know that they could be fired the next day if they're not satisfying the principals, I think is pretty powerful for all of us. That's one idea.
I would concur. I mean, keeping folks honest through a competitive process.
I mean, have any of these vendors doing contracts this large currently? Be nice to know.
Yep.
Or is this the biggest thing they've ever tried ever?
Yeah, we do have references on those. That's part of our due diligence is to check that, and we have some. None are quite this large, but some are about half the size.
Do you know how big the Irving School District is? Out of curiosity? I don't offhand, so.
I think it's 36,000.
I would say it's between 35 and 45.
35, 40, okay.
Yeah.
The only thing I had is I think we tend to think whatever we save, we put back in the classroom, but I've been around for 20 years, and I've seen what's happened when we don't do maintenance and when we don't have bond programs. And I just don't want to, and a little bit of anxiety. I love the competition idea, 100%, but I have a little anxiety of people who come in, they get a contract for a couple of years, and then they leave, and we're just picking up the mess afterwards. So I just, you all have that experience more than I do in terms of how you prevent that. How do you make sure that when a vendor comes in, they care about our buildings?
Well, in this particular bid, number one, we're going to, we got their best price for the total district, so that gives us the ability to negotiate back to whatever level we want to level. You want to do a quarter, a third, an eighth, whatever. It gives us an ability to negotiate back. But what we have done in this particular bid, or RFP, is a portion of their fee will be contingent upon evaluations by the principals. So if they're not happy with, if the principal's not happy with the school, then a portion of their fee will be reduced, and that's kind of done per square foot. So if they're not performing at a particular school, then they'll be penalized for it, and then that's how you motivate them, keep it clean. So
The way you typically see it happen in the commercial world is that most businesses outsource their custodial maintenance, and then each building has an asset manager who comes in and observes, who's technically qualified to understand what their corners are cutting, and you can see the impact of a deferred maintenance, whereas perhaps a high school principal wouldn't necessarily be qualified to do that. But if you've got somebody who just randomly samples and visits schools and provides that feedback, I think that's a good way to make sure that they're not cutting corners.
Feedback through survey would be good as well.
the survey would be done monthly, to be done by campus principal. Do you know, when you spent more time looking at it than I have, the controller's report in 2000, what did it say basically about the custodial operations and what needed to be done?
The recommendation back then was, today it is decentralized, and one of the recommendations to basically centralize it, to bring it back to a central department here in-house. Today, each principal is responsible for the custodians in terms of the hiring and firing of that, and that was one of the main things that the comptroller's report pointed out.
Who's responsible for setting their pay?
That would be the Human Resources Department.
So basically, we're still dealing with the same problem that was identified 10 years ago. That's why the cost, most of the cost is coming from.
When we outsourced before with Aramark, that was for 3 years, correct? And the district had to discontinue that because of the inequality of service and the problems that arose with that, isn't that correct? And it was only the administrative part of Aramark. They didn't bring their people in, they used our people, our materials, all of that, and that wasn't part of the deal, correct?
Correct.
That was one vendor, right?
One vendor for the whole district.
Which I just think we can do.
I can tell you right now, the concern of the people and the employees in the schools, not necessarily the custodians, although they are concerned with it too, is number one, the quality of work. We've seen what that brings before, plus the background checks. How can we be sure that the safety of our students and our employees will be done correctly? Because if we're not in charge of that, we have to do it. They don't, and they can say they do it. And parents and teachers and other people in the schools are concerned about these people just coming in, cleaning and leaving. They don't do any of the things, they don't have the knowledge of the buildings or any of that, and there's a real fear that these outside people are going to come in and it's going to go down just like it has before.
The problem they had with it before was they just contracted out the management, correct? They didn't contract out, the employees were still the employees, and they didn't give the management company any authority over their employees. They were still being controlled by the principals to some extent.
Is that the case that it would still be, or the principals would just do an evaluation?
One way or the other, custodial services and the custodial operations in the district have got to change. We can't operate like we've operated over the last 10 years. We're going to have to find that money. We're going to have to go back to the 2000 report issued by the controller and start making those changes, because it's costing us way too much money, especially we compare us to our peer groups per square foot per per custodian. So one way or the other, we're gonna have to make some changes, whether we do it in-house or outsource it. So we're gonna have to address that. In addition to that, the custodial contracts that we have out there, or the custodial bids that we have out there right now, one thing that they can do that we can't do is, if I don't perform as a school district, I can't be penalized, but if they don't perform, they can be penalized. Now, the places I've been where they've changed contractors during midstream, 9 times out of 10, the existing custodians are hired by that particular vendor. That's an option in this bid.
Yes.
So, it'd be my guess that most of the custodians that are currently custodians in the district would probably be retained by those particular vendors.
Yeah, but it would probably be at a lesser pay, no benefits,
It
no
might.
guarantee of anything.
That's what these people are working through right now, to see what the differences are between, so we can evaluate the bid and see how they're doing it cheaper than we are.
Rena, are the custodians represented through either AFT or NEA or one of the other?
Any of the organizations they can go through, yes.
So there is some custodial representation. Have we gotten any feedback from them if they're willing to
Absolutely.
accept pay cuts? And
Absolutely.
has that been communicated in this bid process?
I don't know. I know that the Custodial Services Department has had 2 meetings with facility supervisors and custodians, and they didn't take a vote on anything, but they gave them what they wanted to propose. We've had some meetings with people trying to look at other ways that they could save money, trying to bring down the cost and everything, and that's where most of these concerns, as well as visiting schools, having people come to us and say, look, what about this and this and this? These other companies can't do that. So, yeah, I know that the custodial services is planning on, if they've not already, put in a bid to try to keep it in-house, because they're really
That's the
fearful.
question. How are we going to balance this out? We're dealing with all these vendors, but we have people that are passionate and caring about our schools right now and our existing custodial services. And
Absolutely.
I'm sure we'd
And-
like to have them have an opportunity to
Well, I know,
to keep their jobs, so.
Well, they want
They
to.
they have proposed, Rena's, if she's correct, that the custodians have had a couple of meetings with staff, and they are basically looking at what they can offer as a counter proposal.
Definitely think that should be taken into consideration.
but to reemphasize what I think both of you said is I think it's important in every line item that we look at what our peers do. And as a parent of 2 athletes, I've been at virtually every campus, high school campus in this school district and our neighbors, and our peers are doing a good job of keeping their buildings clean, and here it's mixed.
So we don't know why we don't know why these potential vendors can do it $15 million cheaper than we can?
Some,
I assume, well, the question is,
I mean,
I
is
think-
that,
I assume it's payroll. I assume.
Payroll.
We assume a 30-year person gets paid significantly more than a 5.
Well, what they're working on right now is he has a committee that's evaluating the bid, asking the questions so that we can determine that. But when you just look at like 1 or 2 pages, you can tell, A, they're not, during the summer, they're not all year round. They come in, they work, and then they work crews and shift from campus to campus and sweep teams. Number 2, they have more part-time employees. Number 3, we don't know yet. 3 and 4, we got to find out what their pay rate is, and we got to find out what their benefit package is. Those are the type of questions that Gary's working through now, so we'll be able to identify those. But we're kind of a long way. We just want to make sure everybody knows that we're not talking about a small amount of money.
No, our existing custodial, cost for salaries runs, right at $30 million? Is that what I remember? I mean, that's a big number, so.
And you have a lot of schools, a lot of buildings, and a lot of people to take care of that.
Well, that's why the per student and per foot's an important number, so sure we
When you look at custodial services, it really needs to all be compared per square foot. That's what you're cleaning, and that's how you do it.
Do we have the same kind of data on that sector of employees that we had on teachers with respect to meeting expectations?
Have you looked at that yet, Dina?
I have not, but since the principals evaluate those custodians we're talking about, and I'm not sure, Ms. Newsom, probably could chime in, I don't know if that's a joint effort with the facility staff, with their maintenance staff or not. So that's something I would need to find out.
My understanding it's not. Those supervisors just go out and talk to them and do that kind of stuff, but the actual evaluation comes from the campus principal.
So it's a campus principal.
How does a
Good in one location.
principal responsible for evaluating 50 custodial staff as well and know who's doing what?
They don't, and that's why we lack consistency. That's why we lack soap in the restrooms. That's why we had the toilet paper gate. All that's being charged to the principal, and that's why that controller report that's that thick, of course, in all the custodial parts on a little bit, says you need to pull the custodial function out. It needs to be centralized and controlled in a different fashion. So, one way or another, we're going to have to make some changes there in order to get better.
What I was getting at is the personal aspect of, to me it makes sense that whomever this is turned over to, outside or inside, that they will keep the best performers.
Right.
But I'm just trying to make the point that I wonder if we had that performance data, and I'm not saying go get that, would we find that 95% are high performing, and that doesn't make sense for...
Guess is yes.
Okay.
Just guessing that.
Is there crossover in employee staff between athletic and non-campus and campus? I mean, do they share sometimes?
From what I can tell.
Employees?
No.
Sure what you asked.
Well, my
Athletic camp cost, and you have campus. Is there any crossover in people?
Most part, no. They usually have their own.
Pretty minimal at both right
So at a
now.
minimum, we could probably outsource athletic and do it cheaper. What do athletic custodians do when they're not cleaning athletic facilities?
I know they're probably assigning, I don't know what they do. Do you know, Dino?
Or you could outsource the entire complex, concessions.
I think we should just remember what our core competency is as an organization. It's educating kids. I don't know of any major business of any size. I'm sure there are some, but this business has evolved the way it has because people understand I should be really focused on what is my core competency and other things that people who do this every single day for a living, and that's all they do. That's what we should do. That's what we should outsource. But I agree that we should try and hire every single personnel that a principal thinks is high performing within those contracts. And if that person knows that if they don't hire the custodial staff that principals have required them or asked them to hire, then ultimately that's going to go into that principal's evaluation. Ultimately, if who they choose to substitute is not doing the job that they thought they were getting from the prior when it was in-source, and and so long as we create that sense of competition so that you can lose that contract and it's bite-sized enough that they'll take it over in a heartbeat, I think people will react. And frankly, if they think there's an opportunity to take over other quadrants or eights or how we choose to divide it up because they could get more business if they do well, I think the district could be better served.
Eric reminds me of another opportunity, and that's to just, entirely outsource athletic facilities, so that, I'm just hearing about it anecdotally, but like Green Hill wants to use Lowe's for swimming, and it's being managed in-house, but is that the most efficient way to manage that? Now, there's a little bit of a problem because they ended up getting scheduled ahead of the W.T. White team, So we've got our priorities out of line. But anyway, it's just complicated. And you got people,
The key to anything, whether we do it in-house or we outsource it, is that, you know, like particularly if you outsource it, you've got to make sure that the principals are happy, and if they're not happy, the vendor's held accountable.
Totally agree.
And if let's do his job and be honest on the feedback, and if he's not, then we'll never get to where we need to be. Because, you know, we got too many campuses and too many locations, so we got to make sure the principal provides timely feedback so that if they're not happy, we can react accordingly. And, you know, that's going to be the key to it.
So Alan, how do you envision the custodial services management piece of this? How are we going to manage these vendors? And what do you think it's going to take internally in terms of, you know, personnel and the cost to have these feedback forms and go out and check the schools and make...
Additional cost.
What's the additional cost on top of the outsourcing?
It depends on how we do it, and it depends on how many vendors we have. You know, like there's possibility we could divide it up to into fours and get... Group, then that will take a few more people for us to manage, but basically it's not going to take too many people in the central office to manage these contracts, because we're going to be counting on the principal to be telling us if these schools are clean or not. I mean, it's pretty simple. The principal goes through the survey, and if they're clean, then we're good. If they're not clean, then we get out there and find out what the problem is.
We're not going to be adding another $100,000 a year custodial services manager layer of management on top of all this.
You know, all you have to do is make sure that the vendor is providing the service, and that's going to be done at the principal level. Now, when they work through all the issues, because I don't know, we may have some time with the billing. You know, you got to make, I don't know, you know, how they build and what they're billing extra for. And all that stuff. So, you know, we may have to have somebody to review the bills and make sure it's being billed per contract and make sure there's no extra bills in there and all that stuff. But, you know, as far as the supervision of it, no, that's going to be done by the principal survey, either happy or he's not happy, or she's happy or not happy.
and can we have a sign, I'm dead serious about this, a sign on every building that says, this building managed by Airmark, and a phone number. This building managed, you know, cleaned by so-and-so, and a phone number.
I don't know where we can put it, but we could do that. We'll have a bulletin board with everything else.
And if, I'm sorry, go ahead.
But what about the supplies? Will the companies be required to provide their own equipment, their own supplies, everything? So what happens to what the district owns already?
It depends on how we ultimately end up. If we end up with one, and the one has to provide it, I think there was a piece in the RFP that talked about that vendors would have an opportunity to look at procuring our equipment. So it would just depend on how we ultimately end up.
Okay, so, and if that happens, and something happens, that contract can't be fulfilled, we have to go out and buy it all over again? We have a real issue. That happened to another district. This company bought their stuff, sold it off. The company didn't work out, and the district wound up paying twice and 3 times more to replace what had been outsourced and done.
I'm looking at an agenda, a lot of stuff we'd like to get through.
Any comments?
This is just kind of the first piece of this. Gary's team is going through that, trying to make sure we got everything, and we'll be working back through this group.
Okay.
All right, thanks.
You know, thanks for your input. Really appreciate it.
The district did it years ago, and after 3 years, they had to stop. It was the manager.
Not saying.
Afternoon.
Welcome.
Thank you. I think it's your slide 10. I think we're going to get this up on the PowerPoint. It might be easier to put it on your screen, but we'll go ahead and start, and then we'll catch up with it. For those of you who are on the commission that don't really have much of the background on special education. I'm just going to give you a thumbnail sketch, just a little bit about when it became mandated by public schools. If you'll look at slide 10, special education did not become mandated until 1975 with Public Law 94-142. And at that point, kids with disabilities could just come to school. Before, they were generally served at home or maybe institutions. So we've come a really long way, which is what I want to demonstrate since 1975. Moving on over to 2001, No Child Left Behind, and IDEA reauthorization 2004. That's when special education really became part of the state and district accountability systems. So our kids are being included in the general education curriculum, exposed to the same high-quality instruction, and again, having the responsibility as part of that, the caveat is to include those kids in the accountability system. So we've come a long way since 1975. Moving on to the next slide. Let's see. Moving on to the next slide, our total students in special education is about 7.8% of our overall student population, and that population has remained pretty constant in the last 5 years. We've seen very little change in that. Those numbers may change by a couple of hundred, but again, fairly representative of the Again, just a brief breakdown about our federal disability categories, just to show you the percentages in our district by primary disability. It's not to say a student may have multiple disabilities, but this is how they're reported by our PEAMS data. Again, the largest population are those students with learning disabilities, which we would expect, followed by speech impairment, thirdly by intellectual disability, which is formerly students with mental retardation. Kind of interesting trend data, because this will begin shifting into how we're spending our dollars. That's why I wanted to show this slide. This slide shows you that the shift in population has changed tremendously for certain disability groups. Specifically looking at autism, we've seen a huge growth since 2007. We had 356 kids, and today we have 814. A lot of our due process and a lot of our specialized classrooms have to support these kinds of students, and I think that is important because these students require lots of services.
Do each of these categories carry different ADA?
Yes, they do.
Okay.
Then moving on to learning disability, we've seen a decrease in our learning disability, not significantly, but we really attribute that to general education doing a better job of targeting these struggling learners earlier and getting more appropriate interventions, which is exactly what needs to happen. And now with our response to intervention move in the last year, I think we'll even see that number become smaller. Then moving to a decrease in intellectual disability over the last 4 years or 5 years. What we've seen here are these students really, we still have MR kids, our intellectual disability kids. We have better instruments that remove the cultural bias. Many of our kids were identified that shouldn't have been identified because some of the assessment tools were culturally biased. So I think that's just a function of that. Other health impaired has gone up slightly, but we have more kids who are medically diagnosed with ADHD, if all of you know what that is. Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, and that is a medical condition, and that's where that disability comes from.
ADHD is under other health impaired versus, okay.
That's a federal definition, yes.
A lot lower than I would have anticipated.
So these categories are categories that DISD has placed on these children after assessment, or are these assessments from outside medical authorities that are then...
Well, the OHI is the only exception to that, if that is the primary disability. Again, what I said earlier is that many of these students have multiple disabilities, but I was just showing some of the interesting trend data with these particular disabilities. That's why.
That's what I'm leaning towards, is the trend going down because the diagnosis is changing, not because of, there's less kids being diagnosed with learning disabilities. And then who is doing that assessment? Is this DISD's assessment?
Yes, our psychologists and diagnosticians, that's correct.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
All right, and then probably many of you wouldn't be able to really say what is special education because it is very, very specific. And again, what we emphasize a lot when we talk to our campus administrators, it is specially designed instruction that cannot be delivered by somebody with those specialized skills. So it's not only instruction, it's support and other kinds of related services that we'll talk about that are prescribed in the student's individual plan. Some of those related services that you typically see in public school. This is not a complete comprehensive list, but these are just examples of the most common kinds of related services. And they're identified really as developmental corrective or other supporting services, because you see transportation in there, and that is considered a supporting service. So for kids to be able to access special education, oftentimes they need transportation. So the federal law and under IDEA authorize transportation as a related service. And you'll see, when we talk about bus cost and monitors, you'll see that relationship as we get into the budget. Moving in briefly, I won't spend time on these numerous federal and state accountability systems, but these are how we are regulating special ed. And they require a significant amount of data collection and public reporting on an annual basis. So these give you an idea of both the federal and the state reporting systems that we utilize in special education. All right, let's take a look at our funding pyramid for this last year. We had approximately $123 million in combination of both our local funds and our federal funds. Just to give you an idea on the general funds, those are both our GO funds are based on our weighted ADA. One of you had a question about that a minute ago, about the ADA, and our local tax dollars. The remainder, the 32%, or approximately $40 million, have come from our federal funds. Okay, and just for a moment, let's look at what the requirements of federal funds, and that becomes something that we have to pay attention to keep our eye on the target. IDA funds are for excess costs for students. They're over and above the state and local funds, and it's really important that we have to remember we cannot supplant, we only can supplement other fund sources. And that's very specific within utilizing those funds as we apply for those annually. Okay, and another point I want to make is the district has to spend the average annual per student expenditure for students who are being educated with a disability before these IDEA funds can be used to pay for excess cost for these services we just described. Let's take a look at our expenses for last year, and these are all of our funds. These are both our GO funds and our federal funds, and again, you'll see the majority, like you would expect in any budget, are our personnel cost, which is about 88% of our costs. And again, those are GO and federal, and I'll break those down for you in a minute. I do want to have you take a look at the contract services, because those are our next largest cost. Let's talk about the big pieces of those contracted services. 2.5 million of those represent bus monitors. We talked about transportation being a related service.
You said bus monitors?
Bus monitors. For many of our students who ride buses, they require a one-on-one assistant if they have a behavioral issue in order to be safe, for it to be safe for them and for others on the bus. If they have some sort of orthopedic handicap or some sort of physical disability, they require a monitor as well. I think we have around 153 maybe. I'd have to pull those numbers for you, but at the last count around 153. At this point in time, not every student with a disability receives a monitor, and that is something that we want to begin looking at in the future.
Is it a 1-to-1 ratio? No.
What do you mean 1-to-1 ratio?
We have
One monitor.
12,000. We have 12,000. That's a...
But 12,000 don't require them.
Correct.
That's correct.
What's the ratio of monitored students
It is one monitor per student. It's assigned per student.
on the ride to and
So we have
from?
153 students, therefore. If we have 153 monitors that require this type of
Exactly.
special
Got it.
attention.
That require that, because of, generally, most of these are behavioral and some sort of physical disability.
You said just a while ago that some require but do not have,
So-
that you're looking into?
No, I didn't say they didn't require. I said I would like to move toward putting monitors on all of our buses. I think that's something that we want to look at down the road. I'm not saying that I'm recommending it now, but I've checked with many of the other large districts where they do have monitors. I think that we are putting ourselves somewhat at risk. I mean, incidents have not occurred yet, but I think it would be a good practice down the road to include monitors.
And
Are they part-time employees? I'm sorry.
That's fine. They're employed by Dallas County.
You said $2.5 million was this cost for 153 monitors? That's $16,000 a monitor? Am I doing that right?
Seems about right. But remember, they ride in the morning and then they ride home in the afternoon.
And they're employed by Dallas County. The
Correct.
district
They're
does
our
not pay
employees.
that.
That's correct.
Right.
But I wanted to point that out as we're talking about contracted services. The next largest cost we have is our
Excuse
contract.
me, I'm just trying to get, well, it's a significant amount of money, but would it be a fair assumption to say that those 153 students are self-contained when on campus? Or?
Correct.
Okay.
There's definitely a relationship between the
One-to-one all day.
Correct.
The cost of those monitors has to be passed to us from the Dallas County.
Contract.
There was a story on the 17th about Dallas County not having monitors, enough monitors.
But there's not a situation where, say, an autistic child who's in a mainstream classroom then gets a monitor later in the day when they ride home or something. No. Okay.
No, there's a relationship between what they require all day long.
Somebody said it. If you're getting a bus monitor, you've probably got a one-to-one on campus as well.
And may I go on then?
Yes.
And under contracted services, we also contract $1.2 million in outsourcing speech therapy services. We have had difficulty retaining our ASHA certified or master level speech language pathologists because of the compensation structure. So those are mandated services, and we do outsource for those. Not all of them, but we do outsource. We currently have, let me give you those numbers, how many speech therapy. We have 82.5 speech therapists and 34.2, if you're looking at FTEs, speech therapy assistants currently. And this is above and beyond.
How many assistants? I'm sorry.
34.2.
So we're having trouble hiring who we need, so we're contracting?
Yes, ma'am, we have to because it's a mandated relationship.
Sure, but how
can someone else hire
what's
them for-
preferred? Would we prefer to have them all on contract, or would we prefer
We
to
would
have them
prefer
all
having them
in-house?
all as full-time employees. It's significantly less expensive. No, to hire these people as full-time. A typical contract employee, if you consider
We've got an upcharge on the
about
contract.
well, I am an SLP, so I know kind of what the federal compensation. It's about $90 an hour for contract personnel.
So, I'm not following. So if we're having to pay more, why aren't we doing this internally?
Because we can't hire them.
Because
They don't want to work here, we're not paying enough, or?
Mainly, it has to do with the compensation package.
And the load that they have to carry when they're here. And the load that they have to carry.
Speech language pathologists can work in clinical settings, in public school settings, hospital settings, and
They can be paid more elsewhere. It's not that Carrollton's having it's easier to work for Carrollton versus Dallas, it's easier to work for Baylor.
correct.
And how many hours do they work a day? Would you guess? Or what are we being
Well,
charged?
probably 7-8 hours. I mean, the same.
What do we think the outsourced cost of this speech therapist at $90 an hour costs per speech therapist per year?
Saying if we outsourced all of them,
Well, no. We outsource a lot of them, right? And we're paying $90 an hour because we say we can't handle them in our compensation structure. But my question is, when you annualize the cost of what we're paying at $90 an hour, do we think we're paying less than what it would cost us to hire them internally?
I think so, because we're not paying them any benefits. Again, there are no benefits attached to it whatsoever. And they're responsible for carrying around malpractice insurance. We're not covering any insurance for them at all. There's nothing. So when we contract through an agency, we do not contract with individuals.
Off the top of my head, what I'm hearing is, we're not competing, we're not losing them all to another school district. We're losing them to Baylor and
Again, this is for your master level ASHA certified. Your speech therapy assistants can provide a certain level of service, but they have to be supervised. This becomes a clinical supervision issue, and it's one we've been struggling with for the last few years.
in terms of the malpractice and all that, it seems like, again, off the top of my head, there might be an opportunity where we have some kind of consortium with other school districts where we share providing that for them.
I would welcome anything. This has been an issue we've been bringing forward for a while, so this is a struggle. I know, Mr. Terry, you have any thoughts on that?
I think it's not only competition among the speech therapists out there, but I think it's also availability of speech therapists, because there's a very high demand of...
We're not graduating enough.
So there's a lot
Graduate schools are limiting the numbers of applicants in the programs.
So I think they really could make a better living by contracting as opposed to going to, because this is not the only school district. I know Northeast had a hard time, and it was a very good environment for them, but it was very costly and very difficult to find speech therapists.
How many bilingual speech therapists are required by the district?
Required
Well, how many are needed, or how many are...
many more than what we have.
And is
I don't
part
have
of the
that number.
contracting out for bilingual services as well?
It's a huge part of it.
Yeah.
I would say the majority of our contract providers are bilingual. Not all, but the majority.
So in a nutshell, we could hire them cheaper ourselves if we could find them. But basically, this is, for 33 years, every district I've been in, we have never been able to meet this requirement. It's not a new problem.
No, it's not a new problem, you're right. And it's one we debate on a regular basis, both at the national level and the state level.
Several slides to go through.
Okay, all righty. And I was just...
I think it sounds like we're spending roughly $10,000 a child, $123 million and $12,000.
And again, some of those are weighted depending on the disability type, and
And the thing, the variables is the number of teachers the number of personnel, FTEs, that we're required is basically mandated by state law. So another thing that we can really save is really whether or not we outsource or insource, and then what we pay the people and then what we choose to pay, particularly for insource. Because otherwise, you can't really do anything with ratios, and everything's...
And on speech, those services are available to students who are not DISD students also, if you're going to a parochial school or...
exactly, we have enrolled to that we have a proportionate share that is also a set-aside amount of money in our federal dollars. So I can get to that slide in a minute. Just moving through very quickly this next slide, I think it's your slide 21. What I want to represent last year, I think many of you may remember that schools did receive ARA funds, or from the American Reinvestment Reactment Fund, and we had 19 million. So again, it looks a little bit inflated for last year because we were able to absorb some of those personnel costs in our stimulus funds as well. So, and then roll some of our IDB forward. But it's a little misleading because we will not have those stimulus funds again next year, yes.
So the stimulus funds, were those specifically designated in the package for special education?
Absolutely. And then we had to apply and propose how those funds would be utilized. So the utilization of those funds had to be approved.
So then, before the stimulus came along, where were we getting the money from?
From the IDB. So as I said, we had more, the IDB, the 20 million, all of our funds have either come from IDB or from GEO. And this was just like a gift for this last year. We had 2 years where we got stimulus funds. So we were able to spend it on technology and progress monitoring and systems.
So in prior years, though, was IDB still about 20 million, or did they reduce IDB when they provided the stimulus?
They reduced IDB.
By the same amount, 19 million?
No. We had more IDB. We've started at probably around maybe 27 million, and then we've slowly reduced as the federal entitlement has gotten smaller for all districts. It's not just...
So this was just one pocket. This was just one pocket out of the federal government versus another pocket.
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay, you said about $19 million of stimulus funds will be going away this year?
They've already gone away.
They've gone away, okay.
September of this last year.
So, as a result of that decline, give me some idea of the practical effect of that decline. What are the things that we were doing or could do that we will no longer be able to?
Well, we tried not to put it in very many personnel, so that wouldn't impact us. So we really haven't seen too much of a decline because we put it in more goods and services. We built in infrastructure in terms of our monitoring systems, our case management systems. We were able to buy some technology-based systems that really we could keep.
More capital.
More capital, exactly. So we tried not to put much. We did put some in personnel when we had some stimulus funds that maybe things didn't cost as much as we thought they would, or we'd over budgeted, and so for that excess cost and stimulus, we moved so we wouldn't lose the money. We had to spend it, we put it in personnel. That was it. Just so, as we told Mr. Terry the other day, we just had a little more roll forward than normal because we were able to spend that in stimulus. So for the most part, you didn't really see an impact because we tried not to put that in personnel.
Let's keep going. All right.
Okay? All right. And again, looking at our budget this year, one of you had a question about the proportionate share, I think you did, about you serve private school students, and we do serve at private school students, so we do reserve or set aside funds for those students, and you'll see that piece in there. Again, just giving you just an overview of how our funds are spent in federal funds, and reflecting that same contracted services. Now remember, there are certain requirements under federal funds that you can't spend in other areas. So just moving through, I know we're getting close to time, looking at our GO budget, you'll see there that nearly every one of our dollars are dedicated to personnel. So you see very, very few dollars in the other categories. Okay, just to give you an idea of our overall staff composition, I just wanted to kind of go over that I could. If you look at the bottom two categories, campus support and campus base, that is the majority of our staff. And really the majority, that's about 97% of our allocations, are really dedicated to either campus support, staff who provide daily services to campus support, or actually our campus-based teachers, teacher assistants. Our campus support are people who are included in our central ARC, so we can deploy them centrally in order to maintain compliance, in order to be able to keep timelines. So we deploy them centrally, but these are people like your psychologists, diagnosticians, vision teachers, behavior specialists, speech pathologists, all of those people that provide service, step education teachers that provide all those required services, and but we do keep those in a central ARG to be able to manipulate the deployment.
So this is the current staffing. Is that any different than what it was 2 years ago?
Yes, it is. We lost 55 positions last year in the reduction in central staff.
55 in central staff, and how much in campus?
Didn't lose any at the campus. Those are mandated services. We cannot lose direct service staff.
So roughly $10,000 per student and roughly a 6-to-1 ratio, because we have 12,000 students and we have roughly 2,000 people at the campus.
You'll see those campus allocations in a few minutes. Okay?
Central level.
55.
So almost half, cut in half.
Reorged, and we have consolidated functions, and so far we seem to be doing okay. All right, campus-based allocations, this is fairly easy, and particularly for those of you who are most of all budget people. Essentially for our inclusion services, and let me qualify what that is, these are students that are actually served in the general education with support from a special education teacher. That teacher may go in, provide co-teaching, small group instruction, may be providing accommodations before and after class, a variety of ways we use inclusion, because you look at those ratios and they can get pretty high, but remember, they're not serving in a classroom. They're actually supporting a student, or they may be co-teaching. So again, at the elementary, you have one teacher when you get 7 students that are inclusion students, and you get 1 TA when you get 16. So again, these kids, as I talked about earlier, are not served in an individual classroom, a separate classroom. Okay, and secondary looks pretty similar. Let's move on to those that you may be more interested in. These are our more expensive students. These students require much more support. They are much more physically and sometimes cognitively demanding in terms of their needs, and so we have a much smaller ratio. We do have 261 centralized classrooms throughout the district, and representing all of these different groups that we serve. Okay? then we've been talking about, I'm sorry, I
Just a quick
apologize.
question. So these 1,448 campus-based staff allocations, these are not teachers. These are the speech pathologists, those types of folks, correct?
Let's go back.
Some are outsourced.
Well, the campus support, yes, they are the direct positions that we talked about earlier, diagnosticians. And then, no, wait a minute, the 448 are your actual teachers, teacher assistants, vocational adjustment teachers. Your 551 are those that are supporting the campus that we just described earlier.
They go from...
Correct.
So the campus-based are teachers.
Correct.
All right.
Teacher assistants.
Yeah,
Teachers and TAs.
and they're aides for those
Those are TAs.
wonderful.
That's correct.
Who who is responsible for their performance evaluation? Is it the campus
Principal.
principal? Okay.
Just like any other teacher.
And I'm sure they've got guidelines on how they're utilized, but then the principal also has some staffing determine whatever can influence
Absolutely.
who goes where.
Well, that's where we use our central office support to go out and help them, because these are students that require, I would say, 90% of our time. Okay? Any other questions on that?
Those special education TAs, they can be used for other things during the day if the principal pulls them to do that, correct?
Minimally. Minimally.
That's ideal, minimally, correct?
That's the way that,
Supposed to be that way. Okay.
They might coach.
during the instructional day.
Right.
They're used for other things.
I don't know about that, but I do know they might be the soccer coach also.
Oh, yeah. But I'm saying they're used to sub for classes, they're used to do lunchroom duty, they're used to do hallway duty, they're used for all kinds of things. They're not always in the inclusion setting. But that does happen.
Okay, so we've been talking about expenditures, and for some of you who may not be familiar with the fact that we do have a Medicaid reimbursement system, and these are dollars that come into the district for students who are Medicaid eligible and who are receiving special education services. In FY 2010, we recouped $10 million for services that were billed. We have our own billing department, that very small. We have 5 people that do this billing for the district. And I think their total costs are around, gosh, I don't know, maybe less than $200,000. So we again, recoup these, and these go back to the general fund on an annual basis. And we've been bringing in, I would say, when we first started doing this, maybe 7 to 8 million. Our numbers keep going up as we do a more efficient job of billing for these special education services.
So the 120 number was a gross cost, and the net of this is the net cost.
So the $10 million in federal reimbursements for Medicaid, is that part of the 83 million in the general fund?
Separate fund.
So on the pyramid,
I did not include that, because these really aren't our monies. They go into the general fund. They don't belong to us. We administer that program, but they don't come back to us. They go into the general fund. So I did not reflect them there in the pyramid. Okay?
Is it your sense, if waving a perfect wand, some potential upside in this number, or do you feel like we're as efficient in billing as possible in terms of getting the money out of it?
I think we're extremely efficient. I think there are ways that we can improve that, and we're working on finding new ways to train. One of the things that's been most effective for us is to go campus by campus and give training individually. We found by giving what I call large group training to be maybe not as efficient. By looking at that data, desktop monitoring, and seeing where we have highly effective billing, we found that system to work extremely well for us. So,
Dallas County's making some changes too, so it'll allow us to build more things.
I assume there's a working capital lag here too, right? Because
It's 18 months. It takes 18 months to be reimbursed for most of this. Some of it gets reimbursed during the year, but the bulk of it is, the big numbers are, more than half of it is 18 months later.
Two questions. One is, in terms of the way we manage special education, Is there any significant variance across school districts? Do other school districts approach it in any sort of different way than we do?
Say for the large urban districts, we look very similar, very similar.
We're actually per student running less than most.
There's a feeling in the parent community that children are well-served here because of the size of the district. That a smaller district may not be able to provide the breadth of services we can.
It's an advantage to being in an urban setting.
Okay, so Ken and Mike.
On page 13, on your chart, you've got learning disability and intellectual. What's the distinction? Define those categories for me, please.
On 12 or 13?
13. Our chart.
Oh, okay, sorry. Intellectual disability, and I don't know if you heard me explain this earlier, but these are the disability categories on the previous page. They're listed are our primary disability count for our district. Well, there's a huge difference in intellectual disability. Intellectual disability was renamed from mental retardation this last year. It was federally, the disability category was changed by the government. So there's a big difference in a student has mental retardation and a student who has a learning disability. Generally, a student with mental retardation requires many more services and a lot more support. So it was changed to intellectual disability. That was a name change. Does that answer your question?
Oh,
In terms of, are you talking about characteristics of students that have intellectual disability, or?
I guess I'm trying to figure out where you draw the line, or where the definitions.
Again, that's determined, it's very carefully regulated, again, by people that are licensed to do these kinds of evaluations, by our school psychologists and diagnosticians.
A learning disability could be, what'd you just say? Dyslexia, but you could be a genius.
The difference is our learning disability students, I would say close to 100% of those kids function very well in a general education classroom with minimal support. Minimal support.
How much? Oh, his turn.
So the $10 million Medicaid reimbursement has been consistent over the last 4 or 5 years, that $10 million?
You could ask Mr. Corby.
Well, it's actually been increasing. The federal requirements and the way that it's worked, it does lag. But we've gone from, we've probably added $3 million to that reimbursement over the last 4 years.
So for the record, we're not in a collection whole, we're not losing money on this.
No,
We're gaining money over time.
it doesn't come close to reimbursing us for the services, but it's not. And we try to maximize that. There are a number of things that can be done, and we're looking at all of them. It's very data intensive. You got to identify the kids, and then you got to. It's a pretty complicated process. You do a pretty good job.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions?
There's a lot of debate on the addition of, and I have no understanding of it other than just aware of the debate on the additional testing now of students that we hadn't tested before. Do you have an opinion on that and the associated cost?
Of our students that are taking it.
We're now testing that we used to not test, and
Interestingly enough, we didn't test some of these students, but we were required to test them. So now we are mandated because we no longer have an accommodated test. It's very clear that one of the reasons Texas did that is so those students who should have been taking that regular assessment are now going to be required to take it. So in the past, we've had a tax accommodated. We continue to have a modified test and alternative test, but many of those students that should have been taking maybe a regular, I'm saying tax before STAR, were given an accommodated. Well, now there's not that accommodated, so those students are going to be part of that assessment. But what we've been focusing a lot of time in our training with our teachers is ensuring that those accommodations are being provided during their instructional day and not just being given during an assessment. So there's been a lot of leverage with us being able to do that now, and now you don't have to take an accommodated test. You take the regular test, and those accommodations are allowed as part of that assessment. maybe I can get it later. You see it?
It's right there.
We'll know where it's at.
Okay, all right, perfect. Thank you very much. Appreciate it, Dina.
So the compensation,
Not mine, no.
Welcome, gentlemen.
Hello, folks. I believe if you go to the next page there in your presentation, you'll see the Dallas ISD Police and Security information. If you'll turn the page to district priorities, I think it's safe to say that we all believe that safety and security is of paramount importance to the district. In fact, it's listed as the number 2 priority for the district. Looking at the budget, not the adopted budget, but the budget we were working with, the $11,095,000. If you look compared to last year, it's almost a $1.7 million reduction where we gave up 49 positions. Last year there were 224 positions, it's 194 now. The police and security comprise the police officers, campus and facility security dispatchers, and support staff. Just briefly, in looking at the history, you can see that we started in '69. It was 2003 actually when we transitioned to become a full-fledged police department. Sometime early in '04 was when that was finally completed. We do the work ourselves along with, have a memo of understanding with the Dallas Police Department with regards to certain crimes that they'll come into the process, mostly of a sexual nature. I could say some things, but I'll wait and I'll answer the questions later on about that. Looking at the next page, authority and jurisdiction, we are all, not all, but the vast majority of the department is licensed T-closed officers. We have those same powers as a normal city municipal police department does. One of the things that I think makes us stand out is the ability to enforce and assist in conducting code of conduct violations, which the Dallas Police Department wouldn't have the ability to do. Being a 30-year member of the Dallas Police Department, I'm acutely aware of what Dallas can do and can't do with regards to what we do here.
So would you mind giving me a couple of examples of a code of conduct violation that would not be something that Dallas Police Department would get involved with?
A principal may ask an officer to come in and sit in on a disciplinary incident taking place between a family member and when the parents come and the student. And they would say, if the Dallas officer asked them to come and sit in, and the Dallas officer would certainly have the ability to say, no, I don't get involved. It's almost say house rules, as it were. But, that would be a good example. When it comes to arrest, when you start talking about going through children's backpacks and looking at things, a teacher may say that a student pointed out to me that someone said that they had some drugs in their backpack. The Dallas police officer is not going to have probable cause based upon that to do it, but according to district policy, we would, which would allow the teacher at that time to take the appropriate disciplinary action against that student. Those types of things that we can do that they wouldn't be able to do or wouldn't entertain getting involved with.
And in terms of the allocation of your staff, is it basically one per campus at all high school and middle schools, or how do you think about how you think about it?
Well, that's our goal, is to provide an officer at each of the secondary, the high school, the middle schools. We're not quite there yet, and a lot of that's because we let the 49 people go last year, and we were given the ability to hire back 15 police officers. At this point, at this stage in the fiscal year, we've actually gone ahead and hired 2 that started last week, so we still have a shortfall of 15 people that'll be coming on board before the end of this year. That will give us enough people to staff all the secondary schools we're going to have some new schools coming in next year.
That was 1 officer per secondary campus?
That's our goal, yes.
Okay.
Selected secondary campuses?
Because some of our campuses are extremely large, secondary, and so they're used to, right.
We augment them with security folks. So Skyline has an officer, and then they have 2 security folks.
okay. But then, and it's just my familiarity, W.T. White's pretty large, but those officers also go to Nathan Adams and Withers. And
They rotate around.
yeah, when they know all those campuses as needed.
ma'am. Annual activity that we do, the next slide. Last year, we actually issued 4,200 citations in the school. We answered more than 43,000 calls for police service. We are a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week operation. When the schools are out during the holidays and summer, we're patrolling. And we do security, provide security for more than 4,500 athletic events throughout the school year, along with many other things, carnivals, PTAs, parents' meetings. Yes, sir?
Out of curiosity, out of the 4,200 citations, are those referred to the Dallas Police Department, or are those internal citations?
Those are DISD officers issuing those citations.
How many, it says referrals, how many citations are going out to actual Dallas Police Department?
Well, with regards to speeding tickets and things, these are tickets written for improper contact, disorderly conduct. These are not traffic citations, by and large.
And I'm not talking about traffic. I'm talking about any criminal activity, if there are drugs on campus, things like that.
We have our own criminal investigation unit, so we do our own case filing, if that's what you mean. But with regards to citations, we take care of all that through ourselves. DPD doesn't get involved in issuing citations on our campuses.
But they do stop people going too fast.
Oh, yeah, DPD does. They have a traffic unit that can do that. So we have the ability to write citations.
No, I know. I've experienced.
If a student brings some drugs and,
we're going to take care of that.
you're going to take care of that and prosecute them criminally?
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to go all the way through the process. We have 6 detectives that are assigned with us. We file our own cases. But there are certain cases, and primarily the sexual nature, that the Dallas PD will take care of. I think a lot of that has to do because most of our students are children that dealt with through the Advocacy Center.
So let's say there's a drug case that you take care of. Does DPD get involved in that in any way, shape, or form?
Absolutely. Let's just say, for example, the principal at Woodrow Wilson says that he thinks that drugs are being sold in the football field outside, on the practice field. We've got the ability, obviously, to do undercover surveillance work, but I was in charge of the narcotics division in the Dallas Police Department for 7.5 years. I'm going to pick up the phone. I'm going to call a DPD. They're going to come over. They're going to conduct an undercover operation, and we're going to arrest somebody, or we're going to determine if something took place.
I guess my question, in the 8 years that my son has gone to DISD, he did not have a run-in with the DISD police, thank goodness. So when you're talking about these citations for disorderly contact or drugs or whatever, and you say it's handled internally, that means it is not referred at all into the Dallas Police Department? Or, I mean, it's not, in other words, they're not counting any of these cases as their cases, or they're not reporting it as, through the city.
Trust me, you just heard about the Dallas Police Department with regards to thefts under $50. They do not want to have us augment their UCR, Uniform Crime Reporting.
But on the
staff.
other side, if you go to the substation crime report, you'll see a whole bunch of crime stats that are campus addresses. So there's a protocol of what has to be reported or not.
Sure. Yeah, the national stats will tell us what has to be reported and what doesn't have to be reported. And DPD doesn't get involved in reporting our crimes that occur. We deal with the justice of the peace as opposed to, say, the district attorney's office. But if I catch a kid in a parking lot with a kilo of dope, I'm going to take that through the Dallas County system, and I'm going to prosecute them just like the Dallas Police Department does. But we certainly use the Dallas Police Department resources that we have available to us.
I base my questions on some statements that were made a full year ago in what constitutes a safe school, and if you have a school that has all of the problems handled by the internal police department, then it's not really being reported outside to any other agencies. So how would the general public know that it's a safe school if it's not being reported to, say, the DPD? And I just really don't know what the process is. I don't know if that's an accurate...
For the Uniform Crime Reporting System across the nation, the school districts are not required to be included in those statistics. The Dallas PD doesn't take credit for our 43,000 calls. Dallas PD doesn't take credit for the 4,200 citations that we wrote. If there is a child that is an 8-year-old is raped in the bathroom, the Dallas Police Department is going to come onto the campus, they're going to investigate that case, and they'll be the ones that eat that stat, because they're the ones that will be investigating that stat.
What about tie goes to the runner? I mean, let's say there's a fight in the parking lot, DPD and DISD get there at the same time. Who generally would handle that then? Would you take over and the DPD would be on their way?
If it's on our campus, we're going to try to take care of everything. It's really important to us with the Dallas Police Department that we not dump on them. It's really important that we do that, and I really think that's one of the things that we're certainly in the process of doing now. Is we have a really good friendship with the Dallas Police Department, and everything that we do is contingent upon that relationship. So I feel real positive that we'll take care of the crimes that occur on our campus, and but we are always there to help augment them. I give you a great example. The kids at the DART station that pushed the young man into the train, he was killed. The Dallas Police Department worked that murder, but I can promise you, we worked hand in hand with the Dallas Police Homicide Unit on that case the day that it happened, trying to identify who those kids were, and it was because of the assistance that we provided to them that we were able to bring that to a timely conclusion the way that we did.
Does DISD release crime statistics on their website, or, I mean, is there some transparency here? I have no idea.
At this point, we're not releasing any. Historically, I don't think we release crime statistics. I know that in the coming months, I'm going to be doing a review of crime.
And why would I see something, like I was giving the example earlier, if I went to the Northwest Division crime stats, I'll see the address for a couple of schools.
Oh, DPD would have worked that crime.
Okay.
I mean, if it's not one that we necessarily would have worked, certainly if their officers are dispatched and
But so then what's the threshold of reporting a theft? Would a copper theft show up there, but
we're going to
a
eat
cell
the
phone
copper
wouldn't?
theft. If a student came home and said...
If the student reported it.
If the student comes home to you and says, my purse was taken, you know that they're going to have the option, they can call us and make that report, but certainly if they call the Dallas Police 311 and say, my purse was stolen in Dallas, isn't going to say, well, we're not going to make a report.
Isn't protocol pretty much, though, if the DPD gets a 911 call from a campus that's routed to your department first?
That is, yes,
They
ma'am.
don't get involved unless you all call them to get involved, isn't that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, that's what I thought. So, say a teacher were assaulted at a campus, they dial 911, they're going to DPD directly routes that call to them, and they're not coming to the campus unless you all call them.
Certain things that have a sense of urgency that they would go immediately, no?
If there's an active shooter call that comes into the Dallas Police Department, and a person's walking down the street with a gun in his hand, sure, DPD is going to be dispatched on that. And then they're going to relay that information to our dispatch as well.
So as a member of the public and an advocate for transparency, I would love to see crime statistics by school being published on the website. I know you're new to the position and new to independent school district police officiating, but would that be something you would recommend?
Absolutely. I believe in transparency, and I think that we're, as one of the things that we've adopted since my tenure there is a ComStat format of crime fighting, which is really an analytical approach to how we do things. And what we're doing right now, we had a meeting today earlier about gangs, and relaying information about gangs that I don't think we talk about readily. And those are things that we know. We know information about schools, and we know about citations by schools, and we know about every crime category by schools. And I would have no problem at all with regards to transparency and reporting that, because I think it is public information.
Well, and if we don't know it's broken, we can't help fix it. I mean, we have to have the data, we have to have the information. Now, everybody talks about data-driven schools. This is something I'd love to see DISD put out on their website.
I've got a quick question on security at games that another commission member can't be here. She said, why at middle school games with 100 people in attendance do we have 7, 8, or 9 police officers?
Well, I can promise you after my 2.5 months that I have had a chance to assess this, because for the last 18 years I've run Reunion Arena and the American Airlines Center, parking more than 55 million people. So I'm acutely aware of the security that's required for an athletic and sporting event. And as we move forward in my tenure, I think that's something that we'll be dealing with, because I also question the number of officers that we have. But a lot of that is intelligence driven. I can't tell you if the game says that Molina is playing Brian Adams and there's a threat that the public is certainly unaware of that would warrant us having 20 officers, we would. On a nondescript middle school game, why there would be 7 people there with 100 people in the crowd, that's a fair question. And those are other sort of things as we go forward that we're dealing with.
Right.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, back to this. I think the last slide really talks about the burglary and copper thefts that we had, as an example of the sort of things that we do, having 41 school break-ins during the month of November, 12 of them copper thefts. It was something that we wanted to deal with, especially during the holidays, because the schools were going to be closed, and we formed a task force within our own operation. And, I'm really proud of the police department and the fact that we are so, I want to say, self-contained, because I can promise you as we move forward, something that a lot of people aren't aware of, we're in the process of hiring 15 people for the Dallas Independent School District Police Force. Last year, the Dallas Police Department, 3,600 operation, 3,600, 8th largest police department in the nation, hired 20 police. We're hiring 15 this year. By 2013, the Dallas Police Department is going to be 350 officers in the whole. Already they're not making theft reports. The gang unit today, as we continue to give them intelligence, said they are on special assignment, answering calls elsewhere and really not doing anything that's gang related right now. We got to be able to take care of ourselves, because we're not going to be able to count on Big Brother to come and take care of us. So I think we're moving forward and we're doing the right things.
In connection with the statement you just made, the authorized personnel were reduced from 224 to 194. What was the impact of that reduction on your ability to provide security?
Well, those 49 positions were a position called security specialist that worked in the schools. They weren't necessarily call answerers. And so with regards to the ability to fight crime, I don't think they were that big an impact on us. I think several of these people have been hired back, I believe, on campuses as monitors, because the principal liked them and they had a good relationship with them. But I don't think that's an impact. I think as we move forward as a department, I think that actually we need to look at going the other direction. I think that, we've got 50 security people at the schools and doing campus and then doing facility security, and I think we need to look at moving away from them and making this an entire sworn TCLOS police department. I think we should move forward and go in that direction. And I think that would supply us with the ability to do a lot more positive crime-fighting things.
So the 15 that you just said that you'll be hiring this year, those all fall into that category?
Crime fighters, yes, they're gun-toting police officers.
And the reduction in terms of dollars was about 1.7 million. So the additional 15 that you'll hire, that would require an increase of about how much dollar-wise?
It really won't be an increase, sir. We were going to go from 224 down to 193 less a custodian that we lost. So really, our budgets, it's not going up. Yeah, I like to use the example. When I was coming today, I was thinking about the situation that happened at Brownsville over last week, and a lot of the friction that's going on in that community down there right now. And, we had a situation very similar to that last week that happened over the Christmas holidays, where we had an officer that encountered 4 youths from Adams High School that were on the rooftop playing laser tag. And they were using guns that looked very real with banana clips and laser sights on them. And, our officer encountered them and made the arrest. Those guns could have gotten onto the campus the same way that they got onto the campus in Brownsville. I would like to think, certainly any time a person points a gun at a police officer, he's justified in using force. But I would like to think in that same situation, if you had a school officer that had been in Brownsville that might have known that officer and might have known what was going on with him, because I know one of the things that really impresses me about the officers that we have on the campus is I walk around with them and they'll see a student out of class and they'll say, hey, where are you? You're supposed to be here. Hey, you're supposed to be there. They actually know the kids, and they know what's going on in their lives, and I would like to think in a situation like that, our guy would have known that officer, and would have known that kid and what was going on, and possibly we might not have had that same result.
You all do quite a bit of training with with youth as opposed to the Dallas Police Department. They're more trained for adult interventions, but you all do a lot with understanding youth and all of that those guys don't have.
Yeah,
Isn't that right?
almost everything that we do obviously deals with youth,
Right.
and I think that's why it takes a special officer to be a school police officer, maybe as opposed to a municipal police officer. I know from my time over there that's been that way, but we have a great relationship with the Dallas Police Youth
Right.
Division and how we're able to get with them and get information on a very timely manner, and now the ability to just pick up the phone and call someone that I used to work with is a real benefit to the district.
Taylor, how are your staff reviewed? Do you get feedback from?
Well, I can promise you, one of the things that we've implemented here in the last 30 days is our ability. I think personal relationships is the best way to be reviewed. If you're talking about a formal review, I could give you an answer, but if you're talking about a realistic review, it's what do people say to us. And I can promise you, what we're doing now is the command staff and myself are visiting 3 schools a week, 3 principals, and we're visiting with those principals and we're walking the halls. I was at W.T. White on Friday afternoon. And as we do, I think we're finding out things that we're doing good, and I think we're finding out things that we can do better. And I think as we learn more in direct contact and communication for those people, where we're maybe we're not doing as good a job as we could, or maybe a place where we're doing real good, that we take that information, I come back and
So ad hoc principal feedback is scheduled ad hoc principal feedback.
Yes, sir. But we have formal evaluations, obviously, but I think that's the more reality of it.
Okay. Jim? Are most of the major urban school districts in Texas configured this way now, where they have their own police forces, say at Houston and Austin and San Antonio?
There are 110 school district police departments in the state. A lot of them are smaller schools. Houston, Austin, the north side, I think, and San Antonio all have them.
And really to Mike's point, are the crime statistics aggregated in any way so that we can see some comparisons on how Dallas looks versus other major urban districts?
Honestly, I couldn't tell you because I haven't looked at the crime statistics for San Antonio or Houston to find out what they're doing or how they report it with regards to their city and what sort of relationship they may have or what sort of memo of understanding they may have with that city. I think that we may not be comparing apples to apples. I think when we start looking at that, we need to be very cautious whether or not we're looking at the same thing.
Agreed. Nevertheless, it'd be interesting to see,
There are a number of things I've compared about the other cities, but with regards to crime statistics, I'm a little leery of how certainly a murder's a murder, but, what someone else may pick up from maybe Houston Police proper picks up or Metro picks up as opposed to what Houston ISD picks up, I'd be leery of that information.
Chief, question. For the suburban jurisdictions, what relationship do you have, like with Balch Springs, Seagoville, Addison?
An awesome relationship, I think, with everybody that we're connected to where we have schools, Seagoville, Balch Springs. I mean, I think, actually it's interesting, the average police department in the state of Texas has 5 officers. We're 115 sworn police officers. We're bigger than Southlake, Grapevine, Coppell, Addison, Farmers Branch. I mean, we're bigger than all those agencies, certainly bigger than Balch Springs and Seagoville. And we have a great relationship with them. They're all in Dallas County. We have a great relationship with the Dallas County District Attorney's Office. We're able to work with our youth in a steering capacity as we work with someone like the Advocacy Center. And I think it's a great relationship.
Yeah, kind of piggyback on what Mike and Jim were saying earlier. Regarding the citation, is it possible to break down kind of what type of citation we receive in these citations? Is it possible to drill down to that?
Sure, absolutely.
That's something I'd like to see along with the stuff that Michael requested. It's kind of
Some follow-up information on that would be welcome.
Absolutely, sir.
For trends.
And you cited 4,200. If you've got last year, year before, what's been the trend line in terms of the number of citations as well?
I can certainly tell you that.
Oh, you go ahead.
Follow up on them.
And one more thing, and then evaluations, the formal evaluation process, does it include like these citations and these calls for service? Is that part of the evaluation?
I don't think we're necessarily an activity-driven operation, and I don't want to go that direction. I don't think that we measure. If I'm an officer and we have 5 radars on the Dallas ISD police force, and I like to run radar in the schools where I work, I'm certainly going to have an opportunity to write more tickets than another officer who may be somewhere else. And a lot of that stuff, you have to remember, when an officer writes a citation, he's not just generally coming in there because he saw someone assault somebody. He's being called to that scene. And the onus falls upon the teacher at that point, because there's an expectation that the teacher, once she requires that an officer writes a citation and it's warranted, will see this all the way through the adjudication process. And the officer is only there to listen to what took place and administer the tickets when they're needed.
So is there a relationship with teachers as far as training and?
Well, there's a great relationship. Everything we do, our officers in the school with the principals is paramount to what we do. I mean, we have to be able to do them because, we're citizens in municipality are really more there towards the citizens. We're there for the administration, and the children to make sure that we do the best thing for the campus.
Thank you. Very good presentation.
Our police officer that, I'm not really sure where, anyway, she came and read to one of our classes on 11/11/11. We asked her to come, she came and read to one of our classes. So they are out in the schools developing, even though we don't have one as an elementary campus assigned to us, they stop by every once in a while and check in and, say, hey, how you doing? And we said, hey, will you come and read and something sure.
Actually, I required that all the officers read on 11/11/11, so I'm glad you did that.
I didn't know they were required to.
Good presentation. And they wanted to. I think these officers genuinely care about what's going on the campus. And so I think it's more than just, I'm here to police. I think it's more about I care. Yes, ma'am.
Jose's comment about relationships with other departments, we benefited in our community by coincidentally having an Addison police officer who was also a very involved parent. And since you're new, you might kind of survey, see how you can find out what officers are also of other communities or also have their kids on different campuses, because you've got a second set of eyes and ears.
Oh, sure. Yes, ma'am. I agree.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, parental engagement, SBDM. Welcome, ladies. Thank you for coming.
Good evening. I'm Sherry Christian. I'm with School Leadership and Administrative Services. I have Shirley Eisen-Newsom with me with the Elementary Schools Division and Dorothy Gomez with the Secondary Schools Division. I'm going to take you through the PowerPoint that's in your packet regarding parent services, and then we'll open it up to questions. Parent Services was originally with Chief of Staff, and then toward the end of last year, it was moved to Teaching and Learning. As we continued to review that department, it was determined that the best fit for it was in school leadership, so that's why it is sitting there at this time. As we looked at Parent Services, we came up with a mission statement that the mission of the Elementary and Secondary Parent Services Departments is to empower parents to participate fully in the education of their children and to work as co-partners with school staffs in the development of their children. Next, going back to the background that I was just giving you, when we took on Parent Services, it came with 2 staff members this year. Last year, during budget cuts, it was reduced from a staff of 11, I believe, to a staff of 2. And started to look at the services they could provide with 2 people, and that was going to be quite difficult. So we've made some adjustments to that, which I'll get to in just a second. But also, we looked at what direct services was this group providing to campuses. And as we talked about that, we decided that it wasn't going to work just having what we call parent services department, because as we talked to principals, we talked to parents, it became apparent that the needs of the elementary parents was very different than the secondary parents. So we needed to look at those 2 things separate. So our recommendation was to reorganize into 2 categories. With that, the elementary parent initiatives will focus on, of course, the parental involvement compliance, because there are some compliance pieces that we have to provide to the government. They would also provide training for SBDM They would work to identify the best practices that were necessary at the elementary level, look for parent resources, how we could do better parent outreach. They would also help facilitate the implementation of parent nights, establish effective parent workshops that could be used across all elementary schools that looked at whatever the needs were for that particular campus. They would also work with making sure all of our PTAs are effective and functioning the way they're supposed to be functioning. They would also work with college awareness activities for parents, because what we found as we talked was that a lot of parents, we talk about college readiness for students and what that means, but a lot of our parents haven't been on a college campus, so they're not sure what that means. So we need to make sure they see a college campus, they see what this will provide for their child so that we can get them on board as well. And again, always the focus is on the needs by school, by learning community, so that we are not just doing a Band-Aid approach or a one-size-fits-all, because parents in different communities need different things, as well as just parents in high schools needing different things than elementary parents. Secondary Parent Initiative is very much similar to what we have at the elementary, with a component of college readiness that's looking at helping parents prepare for the college piece. Hopefully we'll have, in the elementary now, gotten them to a college campus, let them see some of those things, but at the secondary level, be able to work with them on getting their kids ready for the SATs, the ACTs, and all the things that come with that, as well as working with transitions from becoming an elementary parent to becoming a middle school parent to then becoming a high school parent, because we all know there are different things associated with that. The positions, like I said, right now we have 2 individuals in that department. We have a specialist that came with this department that is assigned now to the elementary department, and we have a coordinator that's with the secondary. We will be hiring a coordinator and a trainer for the elementary, and a specialist and a trainer for the secondary, so that they will each have a coordinator, a specialist, and a trainer in both of those capacities. When we took the budgets that had been previously associated with the parent engagement, parent services, some of that money we gave back, because some of that was used for transportation for school choice, but because that department was all together, it was all sitting there in that one pot. So when we looked at what was left over and we looked at the number of campuses being served by each, $200,000 was going to be left in the elementary budget and $130,000 in the secondary budget, so they could do these initiatives that we just talked about. And at this time, I'll open it up to questions.
Wasn't there also a function, Sherry, about there was certain parental education that was outsourced at one point, say the Concilio or some groups like that, and then that was also, maybe that was Title I money that went away? Can you give us a little bit of background on how we approached that?
It's my understanding that the campuses that wanted that did that. Dorothy, correct me if I'm wrong on that. So it wasn't something that we did in every school across the district. Right. There were certain schools that had it.
Right.
We are now in the process of putting out an RFP so that Concilio and any other organizations that want to do that type of outreach for parents, those type of services, can put in a response to that RFP, so that if schools still want that, they can purchase that. And then in addition, if they need that service and they want to go through their elementary division or secondary division, then we can work with them on that as well.
Currently, how many people do you have in this department?
We have 2 right now.
2 people?
Trying to go to 6.
And you're trying to go to 6.
And you were 11 before.
When you were at 6, how much interaction did your department actually have on a regular basis with parents as opposed to staff?
I wouldn't be able to answer that. I didn't have that department at that time. It was sitting in another division. We just recently took the department over in November and took some time to really look at what was going on with the department, and came to the decision that this group needed to be closer to the campuses, and that's why they're now sitting in the schools division.
Okay, then let me ask the question in the future tense. Based on the way the department is structured, and assuming you're able to staff up to the extent that you stated, how much actual interaction with parents do you contemplate having on an ongoing basis as opposed to staff?
Yeah, let me answer that for elementary. If you look at the initiatives that we have outlined for elementary, I would say that 80% of the time will be with parents. As we look at parent workshops, as we look at the training for SBDM, which is with parent and community folks, as we look at helping to establish functional PTAs, that will definitely be with parents. As we look at trying to raise a sense of understanding and awareness of the college experience and getting your children ready for that experience at a very early age, that definitely will all be with parents. I would say 80 to 85% of the time for these three persons, the coordinator, one trainer, and then the one specialist, I am anticipating will be with parents.
This is where I see, and I suggested this the last time, this is where I see a huge gap in our ability to deliver quality education in large urban areas. There are parents with varying degrees of sophistication, varying degrees of resources, varying degrees of education, and navigating through this huge bureaucracy that we call a school system for a parent. And I'm a parent. I've had 2 children at DISD at every single level. And, with all of my education, all of my resources, trying to navigate through this bureaucracy is almost impossible for a parent. And I just feel for kids whose parents have less resources and less education. And so I'm wondering, where is your department a place where we can begin to have some type of parent advocacy built into the system, so that when I can't get the answers that I need at the campus level, I don't know where in this huge bureaucracy to go, there's a central place that I can go for my 911 parent call?
Yeah, let me answer that 2 ways. One is that I would hope that the new Parent Services Department will do the empowering, so we can help parents know how to negotiate the system. I would hope that we'll be working with principals so that parents don't have to get into the bureaucracy maze to get their needs met. That would be, my ideal world. But in the real world, I'm coming to the real world. Every now and then I get out of ideal into real most of the time. But in the real world, there are 3 things I hope would happen. One is that I'm an area superintendent or area director, that my coordinators, the folks in my office, when a parent calls, are to negotiate the system for the parents. And we have a pretty good success rate with that. Secondly, through this Parent Services Department, we will help parents to know what questions to ask, because that becomes a major issue. What questions to ask and whose button to push. And then the third thing, I think that with the new emphasis we have on one call stops here, and we're trying to push that with schools, we're trying to push that with every department, that parents will not have to go through that maze and then start over again, because we're going to send you back to ground zero. But I hear your question, I empathize with it, and we're working very hard to try to stop some of that stuff.
So this one call, you're saying you're trying to go to this one call, what I call a parent 911.
Well, the parent 911 should be to the area office. That when the parent calls the Southeast elementary learning community, the Northwest, that's where the one call should be, for them to then get the response that they need. It may take time. We may not be able to get the answer that day, but to know that we're going to be negotiating this system for you and we'll get back with you.
So how do you advertise that so that parents district-wide know this is...
Through our parent workshops, and then coming back around through Parent Services, part of the job of the trainer and the coordinator and the specialist is they're holding those workshops by learning community, by campus, and district-wide. A part of that is to say, this is how you get your needs met by the Dallas Independent School District.
And I think that's part of what...
I'm sorry. I don't think he was fully...
Go ahead.
And in secondary, that's part of what we're trying to do is the central office transformation is what we're trying to do. I understand your question totally, is that what we saw in central office mentality is that they were more in the office than out in the fields and building the relationships and not just talking about it, but really building relationships with the students and the people that touch the children. So a big part of what we're doing, and that's what we're doing, is that it's moving over to school leadership, so that the calls do come to our office, and it is already starting, I will say. I've already received 2 calls today, and I knew exactly where to go, because honestly, what we've seen is that we've looked at the data, and part of the data shows that there are, honestly, frankly, there are some schools that don't have functioning PTAs and SBDMs. And I received a call today and talked about it and knew where to go and who to follow up. And if it doesn't happen, please let me know. So that process and that is already beginning, because we're seeing that. But I think a whole part of it is to get out of the office, exactly like you're saying, and going out into the campuses, going out with the parents and building those relationships. So I think we're all in agreement, and that's part of the process why it has moved over to school leadership.
So you touched upon the PTA, which is really the subject of my first question. Out of the 206 schools that you are shepherding right now, how many have working PTAs?
Well, I have 154 elementaries. We have 121 that have functioning PTAs, now functioning to various degrees. We have 33 that do not have PTAs at this moment, and that's part of what this division will help them to do.
So isn't that the PTA's job to go out and try to get PTAs started in these schools? I mean, what would you do? I mean, how are you working with the PTAs, and why should you be working with the PTAs?
Well, I think part of our responsibility is to work with parents, and one of the ways that I think that parents can be best organized is through a parent-teacher association. And I think on those campuses where, and I don't know for sure for all of them, but the ones that I've looked at thus far that do not have functioning PTAs, they also don't have very much parental involvement. And so part of going out and pulling parents in a meaningful way to get them involved, I think will evolve eventually into functioning PTAs.
That was in the details. How do you do it?
I think 3 things that I think that you need to do. You feed people first. I'm a principal. I'm an old principal, and one of the things, the way I got folks to come to Harry Stone Middle School, that was before it was a Montessori school, Mr. Cowan. When we didn't have high parent participation, I fed my parents. I gave away door prizes. It was getting those parents to get them in, and then once you get them in, it is having meaningful engagement with them, giving folks things that are important to them.
But isn't that the PTA's job, not
But if you don't have a PTA, you can't do that. Our job is to make sure that we get parents in as partners with their children. And whether it's through the PTA or through a meal or what have you, we've got to get parents coming to our doors.
And I think also it's also bringing all the people together, bringing the people together. For example, we have a school right now that doesn't have a functioning SBDM. The call came from the principal. So what this person is going to do is going to help support and know how to start an SBDM. So that's what this person is going to do. As far as the PTA, we know the people, the parents really are the people that are going to help bring and broker that system. So as far as PTA, the question that I had regarding the PTA, we had another parent and we connected the 2 parents together to help them, but we're just brokering the system.
So do you believe, both of you, do you believe the SBDMs work? That it's a worthwhile to even have these SBDMs? I've served on 2 different SBDMs at 2 different schools, and I will tell you my opinion after I hear your answer.
Okay. Let me get on this fence. I think my experience has been that there have been some excellent SBDMs. I happen to have had one when I was a principal. I have seen some that are not functioning at all, only in name only. I've seen others that are rubber stamps for the administration. So it just runs the whole gamut. Do I think the concept is worthwhile? I most certainly do, because I think it's important to have both community, parents and community working in partnership with schools. Again, that's in my ideal world. That happened to be ideal when I was at Harry Stone. But it runs the whole gamut. It runs the whole gamut.
Is language an issue in forming and having a functioning PTA? In terms of schools that have primarily Hispanic parents and yet leadership is not bilingual?
Shouldn't stop it. Language shouldn't be an issue to stop it, because you always have, it isn't just about the principal, but it's about the whole community. So there's always people there that can help with the translation services, and the district has translation service. So really that shouldn't be an excuse that it's not working.
Is it you don't think it's even a hindrance at all, an issue? Go ahead, sir.
Say yes.
It is, because nobody wants to sit through an English translation and then a Spanish translation. It prolongs your meeting and you don't get as
Not
much
through
done.
translation services.
But it's,
Right.
but it's
If
all,
that can happen.
it's all how you define, I mean, I can point to schools where I've coincidentally been there, and they may not have a PTA, presence formally, but they've got a parent presence. And I get frustrated with PTA, even though I hold an office in it right now, but I get frustrated with PTA that the definition of PTA is how many people have joined. To me, the definition is how many people are in the building, are participating, doing something. But I have a more broad question. You have a lot of goals and initiatives, but you only have 2 people. You plan to have 6. You have 220 campuses. I'm very confused with the discussion about roles and responsibilities on when someone needs help. I guess 2 questions. The problem solving of when call stops here is, I've had those calls of, can you come help me form a PTA? That takes a whole lot of time. But what are what's on your short-term do list for the next couple of months, whether it's 2 people or 6 people? What are the big projects, the little projects, the pamphlets, the forums?
Backtrack and then answer your question. The one call stops is to the area office, not to these persons necessarily. So it would be the coordinators that are in our offices that ought to be negotiating this DISD for parents. So that's part A. Part B, in terms of the persons who we have on board and hope to have on board, short term is for them to begin looking at developing workshops by learning community, getting with principals and the learning community executive directors and talking about what the needs are. As I told you, there are like 34 elementary schools that don't have PTAs. Why don't they, getting out there, visiting with principals, serving as a facilitator and a resource to principals. Obviously, 3 people can't do it all themselves, but they can serve as resources and help with facilitation on the campuses. One of the things that I have asked the EDs to do is to work with principals on identifying one parent contact person on each campus, so that we can begin facilitating and helping those persons to do a lot of the brokering for their campuses. When you got 3 people, you've got to be able to spread your wings. Short term is to do the assessment, what is going on the campuses. The other thing that I want to do immediately is to do some work with principals on what it means to work with parents, on having those PTAs that are functioning, or having activities for parents that are active, and things that parents want to engage in.
Money was no object. We know it is. But if money was no object, what would this department look like? And would you insource it all, or would you outsource a meaningful part of it?
Money being no object, I'd have a parent resource person on each campus if money were no object. I would outsource some of it because I think there are agencies who do some things very well that we could contract with rather than trying to do it ourselves.
This just strikes me as such a, to Ken's point, this just strikes me as such a huge leverage point in terms of, because if you've got someone who's teaching and training and educating 50 to 100 parents per session, like, multi-week sessions like I've seen some of these agencies do, and then they each in turn have 1, 2, 3 children in their household, that just strikes me as something that, and we've talked about this, I've talked about this with Alan, when we've got 125 to 130,000 kids show up on the first day of school, and every one of those children has $30-something in their backpack that we don't get because they don't show up because somehow we haven't educated the parents enough that it's really important to be there day one.
Day one.
That we can pay for a lot of this stuff in itself just by making sure that we've educated enough parents about the importance of having their child at every school every day.
I think you begin that, Mr. Williams, that old saying, how do you eat an elephant? a bite at a time. We won't get to those 150,000 parents year one, but by year three, if we're methodical in what we do, I think we can. And working with principals who have got to be, a major part of this whole puzzle to put it together.
Let me ask Todd's question with a slightly different twist. Two parts. What do you see as the major barriers within the ISD to parental involvement, and what resources do you need that you don't currently have to begin that process that you're talking about of eliminating those barriers?
I think one of the barriers is not within the ISD, but I think it's within the community. And I think for some communities, the issue of engagement with your parents, with your students and their schools, is not at a high enough level of consciousness. Folks feel very comfortable leaving their children at the school door and not showing up at all. I mean, that's the real world. I think that we have to begin engaging with community folk, politicians, preachers, attorneys, the media. Make folk almost feel guilty about not engaging with your children as you should. And there's a large segment that's not doing that. If, as Mr. Williams said, money was no barrier and power were no barrier, I'd fine folks for not showing up. But not having that power, I have to use as best I can persuasion, engage others, of the civic organizations, of the church organizations, and trying to get folk serious about the education of their children, and then get all of us serious about the education of all the children, because ultimately the quality of life in this city is going to be dependent upon it.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, in addition to having the people doing the day-to-day, managing the issues as they come up, you need somebody to launch a campaign community-wide.
I think we have to.
And some consciousness raising and advocacy and marketing so that it becomes a core value of the community as well as...
Absolutely. I can remember Mr. Duchette, who was our grocery store owner on the corner, and whenever we walked home and got our report cards, he was the first person that was standing at the door. Little Shirley Ice, let me see your report card. How'd you do this time? As well as Miss Kelly across the street. Before I gave my report card home to my mother, 5 people had stopped me. That's a community that is concerned about its children and putting an importance on education. That is not happening now, and we've got to have some type of campaign to help us to do that. Can I do it with these 3 folks? It's a drop in the bucket, but as I said, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
This is a much broader effort. This is the mayor. Faith-based
Philanthropy funding?
DIS.
Involve the parents. Something that we've been talking about for 3 years now.
To me, I think this drives...
Dovetails into rebranding and the whole 9 yards. I'd love to take this.
Okay, James?
ISD 411.
My question just would be if there's anything particular you all would like to be prepared for the next commission meeting, which is February 6th.
Well, what are you scheduled to bring? I know we'd obviously like the follow-up questions on the outsourcing that we talked about earlier.
Okay.
Transportation is scheduled, Dallas County Schools is scheduled to make a presentation.
Okay.
And we're going to bring back the commission's questions, which we want to go ahead and pass over and delay until next.
Correct.
So, those things.
So we're going to hold off, and we're going to review the questions next time, the recommendations and the status, right? This is the, right. Anything else, Jim?
I had to run last time, you may have talked about this, but can you walk us through sort of the timeline from here to the next budget being approved? When do we need to bring forward whatever recommendations so that it gets into the process in the right time frame?
Just like last time, everything you did was kind of late. Everything we did was kind of late, but we still got it all in the process. We worked it through the process as we're going along. So as you see issues, we try to work it in the process. We're trying to finalize this budget in May. So we're already taking version 1 to the board Thursday. And it's kind of basically what we've been saying ever since last year, where we're going to be. We still got to cut about 30 million, how we're going to do it. So, what we're trying to do is I think we got like maybe 3 more departments that you really need to visit with, and after you've visited with those over this, this period of a year or so that we've been working together, you will have seen basically all the major departments, and then we continue to work on the recommendations we made the last time. Matter of fact, we've hired, I don't know if we hired them or not, but we found 2 attorneys that we're going to hire. Those 2 attorneys are hired. We're not going to go out for any outside services unless they go through my department, except for the board's counsel and the E-rate attorney that we're using. So, I don't know if that will work or not, but that's kind of what we're doing. So we're working through that list, and once you get these other departments, any recommendations you have, we'll just kind of try to fold those in. The sooner we can make the recommendation, the easier it is for me to implement. But it's not much different than it was last year. We're still kind of pegging along like we went through it last time, and still kind of working off the recommendation list that we had last time, and just trying to get it all finalized. Is that kind of what you want to hear?
That makes sense. I mean, one of the things, just reflecting on the overall role of the Budget Commission. Last time we were trying to come forward with some recommendations, and it was pretty difficult because we'd only scratched the surface on what some of these departments do. So we're trying to find ways to find money. At the same time, it seemed almost a little presumptuous to say, we should cut this here without really knowing. So, I've since, we'll have seen a lot of the departments, but I'm trying to get a handle on how we're going to be sort of more impactful. I mean, not that we aren't being impactful, I think just putting a spotlight on the process, working closely with you, thinking, through some of these things is very helpful. But at the same time, there are some things that take, alternative certification or professional development things that I don't know where we are on those.
Those are still on the list. You haven't seen those.
Okay.
I mean, if you look on that one page that Jim gave, what page was that? Page 2. That's basically a list of the departments that we've brought to you, and the departments we're kind of working through. I'm trying to limit the amount of time we spend with you before. So, I mean, the ones that are not highlighted, the ones we still need to bring to you if you think they're significant enough to look at, and obviously there's still some big numbers there. And those we're going to try to work through in the next few meetings.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
I don't know if you know or not, but just with AC, there's an advertisement out right now, mainly overseas, recruiting people for the AC department for this next year.
I'm not sure. Do you know what the answer is to that?
We need bilingual teachers, and that is the recruitment effort for bilingual. And as we recruit them into our alternative certification department, up to this point, we've had 2 programs, what we call a guarantee and a non-guarantee. The people that we're recruiting are not guaranteed employment with us, but they are willing to come in and do training in the evenings to be certified teachers, so that we have a pool of bilingual candidates. and critical need areas that principals can actually select from. But they are not guaranteed positions with us in the district, and that's the difference. Because in the past, we've always, our guaranteed pool has been the biggest pipeline in the alternative certification.
I didn't mean to drag us into discussion on alternative certification right now. I just meant, thank you, but I mean, I'm just, you know, I'm sensitive folks' time, but I'm just trying to make sure that we are sort of on track
I think we are.
to do what you all need and what the trustees need to make sure that, you know, we're saying whatever we're going to say at the right time.
There aren't too many more departments we need to work through, unless you want to go back and rework through some of those that you did last year.
I mean, you raise a good point, which is effectively, this commission exists basically to provide transparency, but also because the trustees have asked us to weigh in and examine. So to the extent that we're still providing a service to them, we should do it. To the extent that we're not, we should know. I mean, so we need to know what they want from us individually, I would think, because we're just an additional point of leverage and information for them. The only thing I would say is that I do think it's similar to what we did last time, and I'm happy to help be the scribe, but I would love to get feedback from individual commission members based on your notes from prior meetings in terms of what are some things that we might start coalescing around in terms of recommendations. We've talked about some things in the past, and I've got my own notes, and I'm happy to send those out to you, but I'd welcome any comments, you know, let's say up to a week, let's just say, you know, when's the next meeting, February what?
6th.
So I might ask you, you know, by the end of the month, no later than, say, you know, the Monday before, if anybody could have any comments or suggestions in terms about what they think they'd like this commission to recommend, whether it be in parental engagement or college access or some of the things that we talked about. I'd love to get your thoughts on it. Yes, Mike.
Alan, I'd love to see, you've given us these pages, the recommendations impacting the fiscal year 2012 budget. I would love to see some guesstimated dollar bill impact on these so that you know, we can kind of have a good idea of the suggestions that were the recommendations that this commission made last year, sort of where we are in dollar bills on this process, if that's possible. And I understand that many of these changes are being operationalized this year and next, so it's a moving process. It's not all, you know, you can't wave a magic wand and have it done at any one time. But given the documents that were posted online for the Thursday meeting, it looks like the administration's position is still to raise the elementary school ratios and let go 300 teachers and close 12 schools to get to the 24 some odd $1 million that need to be cut for this next year. You know, in the closing of the 12 schools, that has to be a vote by the trustees. What happens if the trustees do not vote to close all 12 schools or only close 6 out of 12? Is there a plan B?
Well, we're still working it. You know, even under that plan, there were still several $1 million we're having to cut. And, you know, we're still looking at going back and cutting central office areas again. And I think you can see that we've cut some of them probably too far, and we haven't put them back.
Yep.
And you know, as each day goes on, I'm finding positions that, you know, we shouldn't have cut. We probably should, you know, so we're analyzing that, but we're still having to cut that. Then you got the other big issue out there is how is this custodial contract going to play out, because there's a lot of money there that can be achieved. So, you know, we'll have to have that. If that doesn't work, then you're going to have back to class size at the secondary or elementary level again.
We also went out for RFP on maintenance. Yes.
That is you know, that is opening maybe this week or next week. I don't think that was not maintenance, so that was basically air conditioning.
HVAC, right?
Yeah, right, yes, ma'am.
Well,
cost savings there.
Well, I do want to thank both the trustees and the administration for trying to find the dollar bills for the teaching assistants necessary for the pre-K and K programs. That is so crucial, and I know it's another $5.5 million we have to come up with, but thank you for keeping that in, working that through the upcoming budget. It's critical for the success of our kids long term. So.
Yeah, and that first little draft is just, you know, just kind of like the first draft last time. It gives us kind of a starting point of things to look at.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. King, has that been posted? Post budget, the draft that you're talking
No, Because I'm really still working on it, but I did notice it was on the, I really wanted to hear it. It is already out on one of the blogs.
The preliminary.
Well, that's a savings.
The PowerPoint was out there.
Where's it at?
It's in the SIRE, in the meeting agendas.
It's not posted on the general website where you can look at
No,
it.
it's in the meeting agendas. But we're still working on that.
The briefing.
So there'll be some number of changes, kind of expand to give some different views of different things.
As soon as we get it finalized, where we think, where we think it's needs to be for that meeting, then we'll post it on the site. There has been a product loaded in SIRE, but it doesn't have some of the pieces that we need into it that we're working on today and tomorrow. And then that will, I don't know why it always comes down to the last minute, but it does, and we'll post that to the website, just like we always have. Did we send that to y'all too, by the way?
No. Just had a question for
With respect to what trustees say they'll be discussing, and to the extent we can help with input, I thought Eric had brought up stipends, and I didn't know if we were going to go back and discuss that, or we're just still gathering information.
The information we've attached here basically shows you how we stack up with everybody else, and I think if you look at it, we're probably pretty, we did it pretty good last year. And exactly, how much we cut last year?
10 million.
So this is Carrollton and Richardson.
Right.
And if there's a blank, it means
We couldn't get the information?
or they don't have that stipend.
Yes, in most cases, they just don't have that stipend.
I didn't take time to match it up to that original list we got to see where, if 100% of the categories are covered, and so therefore we have some stipends that we give that other districts don't give at all, or...
Stipend that most other districts don't give. Stipends are really difficult to compare district to district
Sure.
because, people.
We don't know their
call
compensation
things
schedule.
different things. And it's kind of hard to compare.
Okay.
How did you do this one?
The two school districts we chose were, Dino had talked to you about those districts that were chasing, well, Carrollton and Richardson are two of the districts, and so we were able to call them and get that information.
So it's a manual process.
Yeah. Gilbert is actually here who developed that.
Well, I don't want to take any more time. I just wondered if we were going to be coming back to it, or...
That's up to you.
The reason for doing Carrollton and Richardson is because
The one on the ERG schedule.
they're what?
Let me talk to you afterwards. but what
Okay,
they are, they're
because I
one
wondered why
district.
those two, because,
Right.
yeah,
Okay.
okay, thanks.
I'd like to come back to it, but not spend a lot of time on it. But I do have a jargon question that, noticed on the head trainer, $7,400 plus 9 extra days for VSR? What's VSR?
It's verified working days, services rendered.
Oh, verified services, okay, verified days of services rendered, okay.
Where'd you come up with that?
I thought he reacted really quickly.
I had to call him and ask.
So in terms of the internal budget process, as we went through the various versions last year, the first one or two were sort of top-down, and then it came, more from department by department build up. In terms of this first look that you're going to show, or the next look anyway, that you're going to show to the board, is that a department by department build up at this point?
The budget that the board has right now is built the same way the one we did last year was. It's just from the bottom up. And what we're going to do different, we've already talked to principal's budget group, so some of the things we're going to do a little bit different right now. We have a pilot program going with the utilities, and if that program's successful, we're going to implement that district-wide, and we'll have a cost share with the principals on utility savings. We're going to, for teaching and any position where they change, where they exchange out one position for another, if they save money, we're going to have a cost-sharing program for that. We're going to allow them to have some flexibility with some positions, and what we decided to do with it, rather than come up with some sort of all-inclusive list that you can change this for this, this for this, this for this. We're just telling principals up front that, hey, this is how we're staffing you, this is how we want you to do it. If you want to change a librarian for a teacher or this, that, and another, we'll talk about each one individually, because there's this, to me, when we started talking it, there was no sure way to just clear that up. So right now, that's kind of the major changes we did in that. And that budget process with those groups, the instructions are starting this week, are they not?
Yes, the training for budgets for across the districts are starting tomorrow for the central office, and I believe the week after for all campuses. And the way it'll be structured will be structured with the base allocation, and then any additional money to the base allocation will be identified, and it'll be divided into 4 categories. Those requests because of legal requirements, those requests for safety issues, those requests for programmatic changes or additions, and those requests for other needs. Those all will then be collated under each one of the chiefs. The chiefs will prioritize it, and then it'll be prioritized across the whole district. And we will do a forecast for revenues for next year, and we'll see, what revenues are available to fill any needs that are requested. That's the basic process.
That answer your question?
So when do you think the bottom, the granularly driven bottom-up
My
budget?
boss has told me is the budget's supposed to be in by May.
It's supposed to be adopted by the end of May.
There you go. I will be ready then. We're making good progress. We're on course.
So when do you have the budget submitted back to your office?
Well, we're hoping before spring break.
So we're looking at probably the April period, early May, for us to have it uploaded so that we know exactly the dollar amount. Does that make sense?
So you'd be approaching it the same way you did last year with version 1, version 2, version 3 types of changes? That was driven by the state.
Not going to 6 this time.
That was driven by the state, but I mean, is there a similar process in place, or are you just going to come out with the one recommendation and?
We're going to be working through those versions as we go along. We came out with version 1, get some feedback on version 1, and then we'll work our way into version 2, and hopefully not much beyond 3. I don't see the need for many more budgets than that.
I think that spurred a dialogue last year between both the commission and the administration that was very helpful for both of us. That, we made some recommendations that the trustees liked and that you liked, and vice versa. There were some that were shot down that needed to be shot down. So I just found it a very helpful process to incrementally take a look at the budget in stages.
That's kind of what we're doing again. And I will say that one thing we did that, I don't think I haven't seen anybody else in the state has done. There may be some, but, we adopted a surplus budget, so we made more cuts last year than we really did. So, although we still got, that $30 million to go, we've made more cuts than some of our neighbors, so some of our neighbors are going to be
Have more pain
experiencing.
this year.
Yeah, more pain than we will.
When do we know contract renewals and non-renewals for teachers? Is that early April? When does that occur?
Claudia, what's the contract renewal status? When does that occur with the board?
Okay.
There are several board actions that need to take place to drive that also, and they start this month.
All right. Anything else, guys? Okay, February 6th? Okay. And send me anything you want me to include.
Yes, she was. Oh, really? What they do is they have a matrix.
But I still don't understand. So you go to them?
Well, this is what we're using.
He's not. But somehow there was a